Hey everyone, Dan here. We are just before Power Hour on Thursday, May 13th, and wanted to check in on GameStop today, see where it has sort of ended up and where it might be going. We're going to take a look at the macro and micro charts, so this should be helpful or at least give you some ideas whether you are doing a longer term trade in GameStop or shorter day trade or swing trade positions. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps a lot. And we will also, after we do the charting in today's video, we'll take a look at sort of like where the short squeeze potential stands currently for GameStop, if there might be another squeeze coming up or what that's looking like. So, I started to chart out some levels here before I hit the record button. Basically, this is like a really good must-hold level in my opinion. This previous support and then more recent support here, this basically 112. The actually much better level, in my opinion, is that 132, 133 level, because this was like consistent resistance here, and then when it did get support, that's when it made that huge run up over 300, and then came back down and fell. It dipped below it briefly, but very, very quickly got support on it again and has held that ever since it regained support at the end of March. So it tested it a couple of times since then and has consistently found that there is enough buying pressure to push the price back up at that level. On the upside, actually right about where the price is right now is sort of a significant price range, this 166.68, because of the previous resistance here, previous support here, resistance here. So any of those levels that switch from support to resistance or vice versa sort of have extra voodoo power, if you will. The next level that I'd be looking at is right about 190. I could see it potentially being a little bit closer to 180, but somewhere in that range, and then jumping up to about 220 for the next price target. And if we get there and we can get over like this, all this topping out, oops, I meant to make that a box, get over all like this topping out, then could be in for some real interesting movements, sort of like back up into no man's land again. All you'd have to base it off of would be this activity, but by that point there might be a channel that we could be playing or something to that effect. So that's what I'm looking for on the cautionary bounce zone end of things, and then the upper price targets for the time being. We'll extend those as time goes on. If we want to flip it over and take a look at the indicators, let's first have a glance at the MAs, see what they're doing. So they were bunched up pretty nicely here, all four of them, as you see. And then with today's jump up, they're starting to make a little bit of a curl up toward the 180 from that sell-off that happened on the 10th. Everything got sort of in a bearish formation. So we're looking, the 12 is just looking like it's about to cross over the 20. And then if it can cross over the 50, then we'll sort of like have some run room to that 180 line. And then everything would be in a bullish formation, sort of like what we saw happen here. First you get these crossovers and then everything gets itself over the 180. And then we have real potential to run. So I'd look for that sort of like unfurling on the MAs. And then, we are in overbought territory for GameStop. Historically, that hasn't always necessarily meant much of anything. It spent a lot of time overbought here and overbought here previously, and then just came down to like a midline level on the RSI as it sort of like cooled off in between. Sorry, childus interruptus for a moment. But yeah, so I would maybe look to see if it can sustain, sort of like it did here, a little bit of a peaking out period in overbought territory before it comes down. And if it does, then you might want to look for like dip buy potential to be about mid-range on the RSI, versus it coming all the way down into oversold or near oversold territory. That that push down definitely may not happen. But sort of watch it and see what the price action is doing at the time is always your best bet, of course. Obviously, bearish momentum sort of like tried to pick up here and then got squashed pretty well, meaning it at least like flattened out, which is the first thing that has to happen once you're going to get a reversal. First things flatten, sort of like a consolidation formation that you would see with price action, and then the reversal starts to occur. So bearish momentum flattening out here. Bullish momentum slightly picking up, but it has a lot of room to go. And the MACD having crossed over the signal line is obviously a bullish sign, and the MACD is continuing to increase the distance between the signal line at the moment, and that's additionally a bullish sign. But it's still in negative, or is it just over baseline? It looks like the MACD is coming just over the baseline at the moment, so the signal is still in negative territory. So it's right around the baseline, we'll call it. So it has a lot of potential room to run itself up, to try to peak out maybe here around the 8 or 9 mark with the MACD on the high end. So I look for that crossover to continue to gain steam, or if it doesn't, then obviously act accordingly. All right, so that's the macro. Let's take a look at the micro chart for anyone who's doing shorter term trades, day trades, couple of day swing trades, that sort of a thing. Kind of an interesting formation here. It's obviously at a very telling point at the moment where there is basically all this activity that it has consistently had a hard time getting itself up and over recently. And so that'll be really important to see if it can push over there. It's stalling out there today. It stalled out there the other day, and then when it couldn't sort of like re-enter itself back into the box in the pre-market, then it sold off quite a bit. So I'd be looking for that to continue to stabilize. There is this nice shelf here, sort of like in this area, that is held up consistently, was a bunch of resistance here, did a little bit of a mini stutter step there, but I would expect this to be really, really strong support if it does come back down into the high 140s, say about 148. I would expect it to at least put up a really big fight, if not something more significant. On the downside here, I would look at potentially like 142 as sort of like a must hold kind of zone, because then we get into sort of some dicey territory with this activity. And on the upside, I would basically at this point, it's sort of like in this double topping out formation as it pertains to the 5-day chart. I would look for the price targets that we were just looking at in the longer term trade, or sort of like track it on your MAs in order to see where you might be able to sort of like have some take profit or trim. The 156, we want sort of like a more immediate support level, could offer some help, and then even right here at about 160, if it comes down just a few dollars, might give us a little bit of a catch there. So that's what I would be looking for. And then let's sort of point out what we might be able to look for on the upside with the indicators. The MAs are in this time frame fully in a bullish formation, so that's good. And I would look for it to gain some additional distance between, especially the 20 and the 12, and that's probably where you'll see a little bit sort of like of a retesting of a potential 12-20 crossover. So that might give you sort of like an upper price target to look for as that sort of gap begins to close back in. On the RSI side of things, pretty high, but has done a good job sort of building up strength here. So I can't actually draw on the RSI, unfortunately, but you could very easily see a channel that's here, right, with this activity with the RSI. So I would look for it to continue to hold that channel. If you just sort of like took a screenshot or something, or maybe you have software where you can draw on the RSI indicator chart. If you took a screenshot of this and then just used a program to draw on an image, you could definitely draw on the channel and sort of like look for price points along the way where it would either break that channel or hold it. That might give you another good idea for take profit on the upside or dip buys on the downside. And then on the MACD, very, very high. This is the parabola that we're often talking about, but sort of an interesting like little V shape here. You don't see that very often in the MACD, but the bullish momentum is obviously dying down here, and so I would look for either the real estate between the MACD and the signal to widen once again, and you'll sort of see this kind of situation again where it looked like it was closing in and that the bulls were dying down, and then it shot up some more. Or you might get a little bit of a crossover here. It might give you an opportunity to see if there is a dip to be bought or not. But definitely has a long way to go if it were to work itself back toward the baseline. I'm not saying that will happen, but just be aware any of these instances where something has much, much, much more room to fall than it does to increase. But there you go. As we're talking, it's already making a turnaround and gaining some distance between the MACD and the signal. So that's good for the bulls. And let's talk about who it's not good for. So on the shorts side of things, let's start here. GameStop is not fitting the criteria currently for like one of the most shorted stocks. We'll talk about sort of like how much is being shorted at the moment. One thing to sort of like keep an eye on though is the fee is currently very, very low, just a 1% fee to borrow shares to short sell, and there's a decent amount of availability. Definitely nothing like we saw back in the beginning of the year where the fee got all the way up to 84%. So I would sort of like keep an eye on that. If the fee starts to come up, that's going to be one of the critical components to any potential short squeeze. But at this point, it's so cheap to hold these borrowed shares and not close out the position that's going to keep a bunch of folks from closing out their short positions. Let me just make this smaller so it fits into the screen. Here we see sort of like volume picking up a little bit. You see about 20% of the float is shorted currently, so it's getting up into a like traditionally high area. Like considered over 10 is considered starting to get high, and then anything over 20 traditionally has been considered like a very, very high percentage of the float to be shorted. I know that's nothing compared to what GameStop went through in the beginning of the year, but that was really like an anomaly. So getting into pretty high territory, so I'd keep an eye on that. And then if we look down here, not at the anxious dog owners, but at this chart here, the total shares sold short is increasing as it pertains to the last month or so. So from 315 to 415, we did see a bit of an uptick percentage-wise, but just keep in mind this after a huge dying off of short interest from November all the way through February. So it'll be interesting to see how much this continues to pick up, and if that then starts to drive any increase in the fees that are being incurred by folks. Still very, very short time to cover on here. So that's also kind of interesting that it's so cheap and that there's so much short interest, but that they're covering very, very quickly. So I would keep an eye on those things to kind of widen. More days to cover, a higher fee, and that this total shares sold short number continues to increase. Especially what I would look for is like a significant jump up, something like this 5% or more bounce that we saw at the end of March. All right, well, that's what I'm looking at for GameStop. Congratulations if you caught this big move today. Definitely a good one, especially on in a time when the market has been struggling. But GameStop, I wanted to look at it today because it's been holding up really, really well considering the overall market conditions. So it's definitely putting its best foot forward, in my opinion. All right, well, I hope that you're going to close out the week strong tomorrow. I wish everyone the best of luck, and I will see you in the next video.